Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we're going to be wrapping up our fits for the Jaguars in 2024 free agency. So last video, we went through the offensive side of the ball, listed 8 players. I'll be honest, some of it's already kind of becoming outdated because, well, a lot of things are happening this time of year. But we are going to get into the defensive side of the ball, talk about another 8 players that I think would fit. And there's a lot of high-profile people to talk about as well, because you would have thought a couple weeks ago, like, there's no way these guys are hitting the market, right? Like, this just shouldn't happen. Chris Jones shouldn't be out here. Yet, we are a couple days away, and Chris Jones is on the market. So, I got to start off with that. We're going to talk about him. So, this has got a lot of sides to it, right? Because it's a need for the Jaguars. I know you just signed Devon Hamilton last year, but Hamilton came off a big injury, wasn't the same guy. You're hoping he gets back to form this year. I think he will, but that's all you have. Behind that, you're talking about maybe Jeremiah Ledbetter and Adam Gotsis. It's just not enough. I mean, it doesn't stop you from investing at that position. And so there's a lot that's enticing about this because, for one, it's a need. It's clearly something the Jaguars can improve at. Two, this is the best one in the entire league. The best player. He's not 30 yet. He's going to have a few more years at least playing at a high level. I mean, this just doesn't happen that often. You do not have players like this hit the market really ever. And maybe I'm forgetting a name, but I think the last name to hit free agency that's this big, assuming Chris Jones actually does hit free agency, we'll see. This could be outdated immediately. They might re-sign him tonight for all I know. But I think the last big name that was bigger than this was probably Tom Brady. I mean, it just doesn't happen that often. And obviously, two very different players, right? One's like greatest quarterback of all time. The other one's one of the best defenders in the NFL today. But Chris Jones shouldn't be here. And you got a team in Kansas City that's really, and maybe I'm a little biased because I live there, but it just feels like they've gotten away with a lot of things that should have, bit them in the ass, to be honest. And this is a move I think you take away from a team like that. You have an incredible opportunity to get a very good football player. And, this front office for them, I think it's also a fit because you want to stick around past this year. I mean, this is the kind of move you make, right? If you want to be competitive, if you want to prove that you're not just going to go quietly into the night and you're going to come out swinging, you go sign a guy like Chris Jones because you do not get this opportunity the next year or the year after, most likely. And I could probably go on dang near 10 years after that. These players just do not hit the market ever. So for 31 teams in the league, quite frankly, actually 32 because you include the Chiefs in it, this is a player that you have to consider bringing back or bringing in. So Chris Jones, obviously where we started, the market is roughly 30 million, right? That's a number we've heard forever. I think that with so many people bidding on him, if he gets to that point, that he's either going to take a pay cut to go back to Kansas City, which wouldn't shock me because he's not exactly a good negotiator based off how he did his contract negotiations this last year. It wouldn't shock me if he got ripped off by the Chiefs. But I think the alternative is that you go somewhere else, you're bidding against all these teams, you're going to have to pay him a lot of money. I think you're going to have to pay him more than $30 million a year. So in this scenario, I went with $31 million a year, 4 years, most of this guaranteed. I think that's probably where you see him fall if he does hit the open market. And here's that other teams will pay him a heck of a lot more. But we'll have to see what happens. Now the other big interior defensive line name, one that's a little familiar with some of the guys on the team, Christian Wilkins. So Wilkins, very good defensive lineman for the Dolphins. This number might end up being a little off from where he ends up going now. I made these graphics a couple days ago. Recently, Madubuike, hopefully I said that right, signed this exact same deal. And he had really one big year of production. Wilkins, I don't know if he's matched the sack totals that Madubuike put up, but he's been consistently good throughout his career. And this player is probably going to earn probably right smack dab in the middle of what Justin Madubuike earned and what Chris Jones is going to earn. So I think it's probably a couple more million a year, realistically. And so it's a question of how much money do you want to spend this free agency? Is this the smartest place to go? I personally have a very different take on free agency than most fans in that I just don't want to spend that often. I don't want to be in this situation. Even if my team has a lot of needs, I would prefer to do the absolute least that you absolutely have to because you want to build your team through the draft. And there's very few exceptions. Chris Jones is one of those exceptions in the way I look at it. But Christian Wilkins, I mean, this is another really good player that usually won't hit the market. This is a very rare interior defensive line group heading into free agency. And so if you don't trust that there's the guys there in the draft or that you're going to get that position filled, maybe you go after Wilkins. I think he'd make a lot of sense for Jacksonville because you're going to have a lot of players that have been with him before that are going to try to recruit him to come here. I have heard that the Jaguars have interest. It's not any sources I personally have, but Dilla put it out on Twitter. He did confirm, though, of course, that this is not like they're the top runner for Wilkins, but they are interested. And so this is a possible fit that we could see for the Jaguars. I think it'd be a really good addition. It's just a question of, is it worth paying that exorbitant price? Excuse me, mispronouncing the living crap out of that. Is it worth paying that much money is the point. And that's what you got to ask yourself with all these players. I think for Chris Jones it is. I think for Wilkins is a little more questionable, and maybe you can get away with something that's not as expensive as what's expected with so many names out on the market. Now, our last interior defensive lineman we'll talk about, and one that's nowhere near the caliber of these players anymore because he's an older player. And I don't know if he was ever as good as like where Chris Jones got. I don't think that's the case, but he's still a very good player. That's Shelby Harris. Shelby Harris, I think he ended up getting traded from the Broncos to the Seahawks a couple years ago in the Wilson deal. He's been a solid producer. He's one of these guys that has gotten much older. Teams don't want to pay him a bunch because of that, but he just keeps going around and producing well for teams for what he does. He's not a full-time player. He's a rotational guy. And so it's kind of similar to what we saw with Justin Houston before this last year, where he's going out and signing $4 or $5 million deals and then producing for those teams and playing well. He's graded out incredibly well with PFF consistently, and every team that's picked him up, I mean, you have a hard time finding fans that are like, wow, this was a waste of money. So if you need that guy to put behind to replace Fadakasi and to put behind Hamilton, I think Shelby Harris is a really logical one, and this could be a really good signing that could take place after the draft. So I wouldn't look for this immediately, but this would be a player that would make a lot of sense for Jacksonville, especially when you consider the situation they could be in with compensatory picks. Because say Calvin Ridley walks, which I think is probably more likely than not right now. We'll see 2 days time from now. But if he walks, you have to be careful about your spending. And you have to ask yourself, essentially, when you're spending big on players, is it worth the third round compensatory pick that we would lose to go after a big time player? You also have to watch how many players you sign. And so Harris would be an example of a player they might like, a veteran guy who's had a lot of experience in the NFL, that they could bring in maybe after the draft when compensatory free agents, they're basically eliminated at that point. It doesn't count towards it after the draft, I think on Monday or Tuesday the following week. This would be a really logical signing for the Jaguars deep into the offseason. So not one to look out for right now, but a name to look out for down the road. So let's get to one more big name. And we've got some other decent players to talk about here, but this is going to be the last, creme de la crop, right? And that's Danielle Hunter. He makes the thumbnail because, well, I mean, this is the guy we've heard about for a whole year at this point. Hunter is a fantastic outside linebacker, super productive player, just coming off, I believe, his most productive season in the sack column, ended up basically matching what Josh Allen did. And I think when I look at this defense right now and how things are going to look going forward, I think you need a defensive end, a defensive tackle, and a starting outside linebacker. That sounds crazy, but my reasoning is that everything you hear about Trayvon Walker, it sounds like he's going to move to defensive end primarily this next season. I could also see him just being an outside linebacker, in 3-4, and then maybe in 4-3 is just defensive end, similar to what Josh Allen will be asked to do. I could see that, but I think the best thing for Walker is to play in that defensive end role, and you need to have a rotational guy behind that. So why not bring in an outside linebacker that can start in your 3-4 fronts, have Trayvon Walker go defensive end, and then you got these guys rotating on the 4-3 fronts. I mean, I think that makes sense. It's a player they've clearly been interested in, so you don't really have questions about whether they would like to bring him in or not. And I think in our predictions video we'll put out probably tomorrow, this is be one I would expect to come to Jacksonville, just with so much hype around it. The Jaguars have clearly and utterly been the most interested team in the NFL, to the point where Vikings reporters are saying that it's a question of whether he comes back to the Vikings or whether he goes to Jacksonville. That's how much stuff we hear about this. So maybe a team like the Commanders come in and try to outbid you, but I think this is going to happen. I think they are going to get Danielle Hunter. I think they're going to go swinging after him, make a couple big moves, probably this, trying to get back Calvin Ridley, and we'll see where we go from there, but probably a lot of veterans after that, which, I mean, that's what free agency is, to be fair. But as far as Danielle Hunter's money, what he's going to get, I projected $24 million a year. We've heard that he wants to look for 25. Market projections are just a little bit over $20 million, so we'll see where that lands. It could be a little more expensive than this $24 million mark a year, but probably a 3-year contract, 2 years guaranteed. And look, I mean, if you're going to spend money, this is a good investment. This is the kind of player you want to spend money on. It's just a question of what is your philosophy this offseason? Do you want to try to get ahead in the cap, catch up to the division, or do you want to go all in? You got to find your balance there. And I've made it clear, I would prefer for the Jaguars not to spend a bunch. I would prefer them to bring in a ton of money to the next offseason, because I think that's going to be an opportunity for them to catch up to the rest of the division and use this year to just see what they got, because there's a lot of question marks about the long-term futures of a lot of positions on this offense and the defense. So that's the way I see it. But I think Danielle Hunter is going to be a Jaguar in just a couple days' time. I just have that gut feeling. They've been trying so hard for so long to get him. And now, you might get him for basically no price. So we'll see what happens. But another outside linebacker, Leonard Floyd. It's the guy on the right, not the one on the left. But he's a sneaky one. I saw something today about the 10 best value contracts in free agency since 2020. Leonard Floyd's a top 10 contract on there. He didn't earn a lot with Buffalo, yet he was a super productive player. He's one we've talked about a little bit on the channel before, I believe, or I've at least thrown it out on my Twitter. He would make a lot of sense as that outside linebacker. I would really like this fit. I mean, maybe if you want to look at Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker as both basically splitting time at outside linebacker and defensive end, depending on 3-4, 4-3, whatever front you're in, Leonard Floyd would make sense to bring in as that backup outside linebacker. We'll see what happens there, but I think he would be a name that makes sense. You've got connections to Buffalo on the roster potentially coming in. You've got other players we've talked about. I could see them purging some players from Buffalo, and this would be one that I would like to see for Jacksonville. I think it would be a really good addition and one that would have a lot of value. You talk about what the Ravens got out of Jadeveon Clowney last year. I think you're looking at that same kind of impact potentially from Leonard Floyd. They just can't keep him in Buffalo solely because of money, solely because of the cap space. He's earned an extension from them. They just don't have a choice. So definitely a player that I would watch for the Jaguars. I think he'd be a really good fit in Jacksonville as, a 1 or 2 year guy that could just produce and add some depth to that pass rush. Now, got 3 more guys for you. I'm going to talk about the secondary a little bit. We're going to start with the big signing out of these. Chidobe Awuzie out of Cincinnati. I think he probably goes for around where Darius Williams' contract was. That's probably the realistic outcome. He was a really good cornerback for the Cincinnati when he got signed by them. Ended up tearing his ACL, I believe, in 2022, but came back to form pretty well last year. He is a player that I think during this contract would kind of start to get to the end of his prime, but still a very good player right now. Someone I think who could do well in man coverage and press, fit your scheme, and really just be a logical replacement for Darius Williams if you want to have this sorted out with a high-profile player in free agency. Now, we'll see how they spend there, because I think it's possible they might just look at this in the draft. I think there's names that make tons of sense in the first round. If I had to say to you guys who I think the draft pick is going to be at 17 right now, I think it's Terrion Arnold or I think it's Quinyon Mitchell. I think everything points to that right now. I'm not saying it can't be something else. We've been wrong before. That's happened a lot. But it makes a lot of sense for the Jaguars. And I don't know if they spend a lot at cornerback, but if they're going to, this is probably the top guy on the list for the Jaguars, would be Chidobe Awuzie. Solid contract, 2 years. Player I think that would be a reliable and good starter for the Jaguars. Solidify that secondary. Now, the one I think is most likely, the one I think honestly right now might be over a 50% chance of happening, that's Jeff Okudah from the Falcons. Every single thing I feel like points towards him coming here. Played in Ryan Nielsen's scheme last year. He's a cheaper player. He could play outside. He was better last year than he was throughout his entire rookie contract. You're going to get him cheap. It's just a logical fit. If you want to make sure that you're safe at that position by the time free agency's done, this is the player you go after. And this would be the one out of the two mainly outside cornerbacks we're talking about, the one I would target, because I think it's a really good bang for your buck deal. And you got to remind yourself, like, as unlikely as it is that he just somehow gets to, like, his original form heading into the league, he was the 3rd overall pick in the draft. This is a player who had a ton of potential coming in. I think he is a very logical fit to play outside for the Jaguars for this year. Maybe even give him a 2-year deal just to give him some time here. But you're at least making sure that you have a really good backup, if not a potential starter. And if you need him to start, I would do it. I'd be completely fine with that. Do I think he's going to go out there and dominate? No, but I think that it's a really good deal for what you're paying him. So Jeff Okudah, keep your name on him, keep your eye on his name in free agency, because I think he's going to be a Jacksonville Jaguar within the week, but we'll see. Now, our final guy on here, and then I'll probably hit on some general news that we've heard, some players that might make sense on offense I didn't get to talk about, just really quick to finish this off. But our last guy, C.J. Gardner-Johnson. I couldn't help myself but use this as the picture. I mean, why wouldn't I? But I think it makes a lot of sense for him to come to Jacksonville, because they seem like they want to upgrade the slot cornerback position. If you're wanting to do that through free agency, C.J. Gardner-Johnson is a very logical fit, especially if Calvin Ridley returns. I mean, these guys are pretty good friends, know each other pretty well. I would imagine if Ridley comes back, he's probably clamoring for C.J. to come to the team. And C.J., I don't think he's going to be like a first-day signing. I think he's someone you go a little bit into the process, then you see where he goes. And the way things went for him, like, the market was not that good last year. He went to Detroit. He played well, but he got hurt. And so it sucks for him, right? But it's kind of a good situation for the team. I mean, it's sort of like the stuff with Marcus Davenport, who is another fit. I didn't throw him on this video. Actually, probably should have, but I limited myself to 8 people. He's another one to talk about because it's a similar situation, right? Player that was pretty good during their rookie deal, got a 1-year prove-it deal, ended up just getting hurt. And you didn't really get to see what you wanted, but now you can go out and take advantage of that. So Marcus Davenport is another one to throw on here as well. With C.J. Gardner-Johnson, I think his market value is probably actually about the same, $6 million a year. And maybe that these are players that you can lock up for like 2 years just to keep it cost controlled would be really nice. Now, as we wrap this up, just want to throw out some names that have emerged in recent days since I recorded the offensive fits One that has come out recently is Mitch Morse from Buffalo. He's actually visiting with the Jaguars today when I'm recording this. He would be a logical fit. I think it's a guy who could be a solid starter. He was cut because of cap reasons. Not that, he was the best player in the world and they couldn't afford him, but still, like, solid starter. Couldn't keep him because of the cap. Buffalo's going through a bit of a rebuild or a reload, if you want to call it that. So Mitch Morse would be another name I would look at on the offensive side of the ball. And then the other one that might emerge, and he has not been cut yet, but I've seen reports about it. It would make a ton of sense for the Jaguars. That would be Garrett Bradbury out of Minnesota. He was the center for the Vikings for a while now. He was there when Phil Rauscher was there, one of the years he was there. And Bradbury, he's not a great starter, right? But he's an average player. He's a veteran presence you can bring in. I think he's probably going to be like 3 or 4 million at most, based off the fact that his APY, I think, was 5.25 million with the Vikings, and he's probably going to get cut off that. So you're not going to beat that number, right? Because if you were, team's going to trade you something for that. So if he hits the market, it's going to be cheaper. You think about as well, like, your offensive line, right now that you're probably keeping the outside four, right? The tackles and the guards. Center is where it's going to change. And it's fair to say, out of all the issues, and there are many, but center was probably the biggest one because people at the guard spots were having to come in and help him consistently. If you get Bradbury in, you now have someone who's played alongside Ezra Cleveland for the last 3 or 4 years now. And so you're going to have continuity there. These are two guys that came from one of the best offensive lines in the NFL last year. And I think it would help Brandon Scherf as well, of course. Obviously, they haven't played together, but Scherf needs help on the left side because, there's just nothing there right now. And same for Ezra, but it's a really good fit to put alongside Ezra. Probably the cheapest viable option for the Jaguars to resolve the center position. Now, I'll say it again, I think they need to address it through the draft. I do not think they will. I think that would be the best way to do it. I think you want to get a young player with a ton of upside because there's so many available in this draft class and have that guy you can pair with Trevor Lawrence for a long time. I think you want a high-end solution there because of how much that can transform the offense, because that's where you see your pass protection issues, and most importantly, that's where you see your run blocking issues. You can't run the ball up the middle. And it would not be shocking if at the end of this next year, if they don't do enough at center, if we're calling Tank Bigsby a bust, because he can't run it up the middle. And I think it's unfair, but we might get to that point because we aren't even giving him a chance. So that's a problem. I think they need to do something there. I would love to get a major upgrade, but if they're going to go the veteran route and just bring in a little bit of competition, Bradbury's probably going to be one of their guys, just depending on if he hits the market before the Jaguars have signed someone. And the other thing about that, and Morse, is that these are non-CFAs, right? They got released. They're not going to count in the compensatory pick formula. It's not going to impact anything there. And that's the kind of thing that you want to see. So those are names to throw out as far as free agents. And then one little tidbit here before we finish the episode. There is talk about Greg Newsome getting traded, potentially, from the Cleveland Browns. I would be 100% on board exploring that. He's a very good slot cornerback, someone who is going to his 4th year of his deal. You have the 5th-year option. You can accept that 5th-year option, pay him $12, $13 million in 2025. Gives you a couple years to really see how this guy fits into the team. You can trade him later if it's not working out, get something out in return, or get the comp pick in the future. And I don't think it's going to cost a crazy amount. I think Jacksonville could maybe get away with sending a 4th-rounder for him. So that's a player I'm exploring because he is a good starter. He's a guy who makes a ton of sense for fitting in this scheme. He's a press corner. And he could be physical in the run game. All things you need, and I would love to see him come in because he's not only a slot, but someone who can kick outside as well if asked to. So that's a name I'm going to be watching very close as far as a potential trade for the Jaguars. But that's what I've got for you guys. we'll see what happens here in just a couple days. I will be uploading a predictions video for who I think will sign with the Jaguars in free agency. That'll be the next one. It'll either come out Sunday afternoon or it'll come out very early Monday morning as free agency is about to kick off. But that's what we've got here. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know some potential fits that you think are available in free agency, who you would sign, what you would do. I think it's really fun to do that. In fact, I'm going to be keeping record of all the things I would have done this free agency so we can look back on it in a year and see how that would have done compared to what the Jaguars did. I think that'll be a lot of fun. But that's all I've got. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. And finally, go Jags.